Out here, in the Arizona territory, the sun doesn't just shine, it bakes secrets right into the cracked dirt. Every shadow is long, and every long shadow can hide a man with a gun. This is a story about a woman named Adeline Rosewood, a widow, tough as shoe leather, living on a homestead that was nothing more than a speck of dust in the middle of nowhere. She thought she'd already seen the worst this land had to offer. She was wrong, because a storm was coming, and that storm was about to wash a dead man onto her doorstep. Except, he wasn't quite dead, and he wasn't just a man. He was a secret that was about to set the entire territory on fire. The sky had been the color of a nasty bruise all afternoon. Adeline watched it from her cabin window, her hands deep in bread dough. The wind was kicking up dust, a dry, spicy smell that always came before the rain. It was monsoon season, 1883, the time of year when the sky throws a fit. Her cabin was small, but Thomas, her late husband, had built it strong. It stood alone near a sad little trickle of water called Willow Creek. Thomas had been gone 2 years now. A fever took him, fast and mean. It left Adeline with the cabin, a stubborn mule named Clementine, and a whole lot of silence. When the storm finally hit, it was like a cavalry charge. The rain came down in solid sheets, hammering the roof. Thunder cracked like a whip, and lightning lit up the world in flashes of black and white. Adeline wasn't easily scared. This land had sanded off her soft edges. She lit a lamp and went back to her dough. Push, fold, turn, a simple rhythm in a world gone mad. Then she heard it. Over a deafening clap of thunder, there was another sound, a sound that didn't belong. A raw, scraping cry, swallowed by the wind. She froze. It could have been anything. A mountain lion, the wind. But it sounded human. Her husband's voice echoed in her head. Addie, what you don't know is the only thing that might keep you alive. But her father, a doctor back in Ohio, had taught her something different. To ignore a cry for help, he'd said, is to lose a piece of your own soul. The storm finally whimpered away an hour later. The cry hadn't come again. Adeline couldn't settle. She pulled on Thomas's old coat, grabbed the heavy Winchester rifle from the wall, and stepped outside. The world was a sea of red mud. She checked on her mule, then started walking the edge of her property, her eyes scanning the churned-up earth. She found him by the creek bed, which was now a small, angry river. He was washed up against some mesquite bushes, a dark heap of buckskin and flesh. Lightning flashed, and she saw him clear. A man, face down in the mud. He was Apache, no doubt about it. The long black hair, the high cheekbones, the moccasins, a cold fear, colder than the rain, washed over her. The newspapers were full of stories about Apache raids. Settlers called them ghosts, the enemy. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The smart thing to do was to go back inside, bar the door, and wait for morning. He was probably dead anyway. If not, he was a threat. She started to back away, but then he moaned. A low, guttural sound of pure agony. He was alive. Adeline's feet felt like they were nailed to the ground. She didn't see an enemy anymore. She saw a man drowning in his own blood. The doctor's daughter took over. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She set the rifle down and knelt beside him. He was heavy, all wiry muscle, but she managed to roll him over. His face was a wreck. A deep gash ran from his temple to his cheek, but his side. That was the real problem. A ragged, dark hole in his tunic was still oozing blood. A gunshot. His eyes fluttered open. For a single, terrifying second, they locked onto hers. They were black, bottomless pits, filled with a burning rage that shocked her to her core. It was the look of a hawk caught in a trap. Then his eyes rolled back in his head. He was out cold. Bringing him into her house was insane. If anyone found out, they'd call her a traitor. They'd form a mob. But leaving him here? The coyotes would have him before sunrise. She looked at his face again, at the proud lines softened by unconsciousness. In that moment, he wasn't a warrior. He was just a man, broken at her feet. God forgive me, she whispered. She went to the barn, got the mule, and a length of rope. Getting him onto Clementine's back was a nightmare. He was a dead weight, and the mule was spooked. But Adeline was stubborn. She finally got him secured and led the mule back to the cabin. She laid him on the bearskin rug in front of the dying fire, coaxing the flames back to life. For the next few hours, Adeline became a doctor. She cut away the bloody buckskin. She tended to Thomas when he was dying. She'd lost all sense of modesty. This was just a body that needed fixing. His physique was startling, lean, but corded with muscle. His skin was a roadmap of old scars. This was a man who had lived his entire life in a state of war. She found the bullet wound, just below the ribs. No exit wound. The slug was still inside him. She retrieved her father's old medical bag. She cleaned the wounds with boiled water and soap. The gash on his head was deep, but she stitched it closed with a steady hand. The bullet was a different story. Trying to dig it out would kill him. Sometimes you just had to clean the wound, fight the fever, and pray. She packed the hole with yarrow and willow bark and bandaged his torso tightly. As she worked, she noticed a small beaded amulet around his neck on a leather thong. It looked ancient, important. She forced sips of willow bark tea between his lips. For 3 days, he was lost in a fever. He'd cry out in a language she didn't know, words that sounded like curses and commands. He thrashed and fought and even weakened. His strength was terrifying. Adeline slept in a chair with the Winchester across her lap. This man could kill her, and she knew it. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. She woke to find him staring at her. The delirium was gone. His eyes were clear, sharp, and unnervingly intelligent. The rage was gone too, replaced by a watchful calm that was somehow even more frightening. The silence in the cabin was thick. He just watched her. He saw the frayed cuffs of her dress, the exhaustion under her eyes. He saw the rifle in her lap. Adeline stood up slowly and set the rifle against the wall, a gesture of peace. She ladled some broth into a bowl and approached him like you'd approach a cornered wolf. She offered it to him. He stared at the bowl, then back at her. His eyes narrowed. She understood. She took the spoon, sipped the broth herself, and then offered it again. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. A treaty had just been signed. He struggled to sit up, his jaw clenched in pain. He took the bowl, his hand surprisingly steady, and drank, his eyes never leaving her face. When he was done, he handed the bowl back. His calloused fingers brushed hers. The contact sent a strange jolt through her. He gestured to the bandages on his side. Then he looked at her. The question was clear in his eyes. "You did this?" She nodded. "You were shot. The storm washed you into the creek." He took this in, his face a stone mask. He looked around the cabin, his gaze lingering on her books, on a faded photo of her and Thomas, his inspection so thorough it was like he was memorizing an enemy map. Then he spoke. His voice was a low rasp. "Why?" Just one word. But it held 1,000 questions. Why save an enemy? Why risk your own life? What do you want from me? Adeline met his gaze. The fear was still there, but something else was rising up to meet it. Defiance. "I couldn't leave you to die," she said. It was the simple truth. He held her gaze, searching for a lie, for pity, for anything he could understand. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. He leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. The interrogation was over. For now. The days that followed were quiet, but tense. He never spoke unless she did, and his answers were short, clipped. But his silence wasn't empty. It was full of observation. Adeline felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. She learned his name was Kyle. It sounded wrong on his lips. It wasn't an Apache name. She figured it was a name he used for white men, and she didn't push it. His recovery was remarkable. Each day, he was stronger. He started moving around the cabin, his steps slow but graceful. like a predator testing its limbs. A fragile trust began to form, not in words, but in actions. He watched her cook, and when she burned her hand, he was on his feet instantly, pointing at her aloe plant with a look of concern. She learned to read him too. The tension in his shoulders meant his side was hurting. A faraway look meant he was thinking of his own world. One afternoon, a little wren flew into the cabin and started beating itself against the window, desperate to get out. Adeline went to shoo it away, but Kyle held up a hand. He rose, silent as a ghost, and started murmuring to the bird in his own language. The words were soft, musical. He gently cupped the bird in his hands, walked to the door, and opened his palms. The bird shot into the sky. In that moment, she didn't see a warrior. She saw a man who was part of the earth itself. But the outside world wasn't going to leave them alone. On the sixth day, the sound of hoofbeats sent a shockwave of alarm through the cabin. Kyle was instantly on his feet, his body coiled like a snake, his hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Adeline ran to the window. Her heart leaped into her throat. Two riders, white men, rough-looking, with rifles in their saddle scabbards. A cold dread filled the room. "Get down!" Kyle's voice was a low, urgent command. "Away from the window!" She dropped into a crouch, her mind racing. Kyle flattened himself against the wall by the door, completely hidden from view. The patient was gone. The warrior was back. One of the men, a big, bearded brute, called out, "Hello, the house? Anyone home?" If she didn't answer, they'd come in. If she did, her voice would shake. "Answer him," Kyle whispered. "Tell them your husband is away." Adeline took a shaky breath, went to the door, and opened it a crack. "Can I help you?" The bearded man gave her a greasy smile. "Just passing through, ma'am. Me and my partner, Gus. We're looking for someone. An Apache buck, shot up pretty bad. You ain't seen anyone like that, have you?" The blood drained from Adeline's face. These were the men who shot him. She forced herself to meet the man's gaze. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "No one's been through here." His eyes roamed past her, into the dark cabin. "You all alone out here, ma'am? A pretty thing like you?" "My husband is in town for supplies," she lied, the words tasting like ash. "I expect him back before sundown." The other man, Gus, spat tobacco juice. "Lost his trail in that flood, washed everything clean. But he's hurt. Can't have gotten far." "Well, he's not here!" Adeline snapped. She tried to close the door, but the bearded man, Kane, held up a hand. "Hold on now. We're mighty thirsty. You wouldn't begrudge us a dipper of water from your well, would you?" It was a test. Refuse and they'd get suspicious. Agree, and they'd be on her property, closer to the house, closer to discovering Kyle. She could feel Kyle's tension from his hiding spot, a dangerous, palpable thing. "The well is over there," she said, nodding. "Help yourselves, but be on your way after. My husband is a jealous man." Kane laughed. "I bet he is." They ambled over to the well. Adeline stood in the doorway, her back rigid. The minutes crawled by. The men drank, watered their horses, their eyes constantly scanning her property. Finally, they mounted up. "Much obliged, ma'am," Kane called out. "If you do see that stray Apache, there's a handsome bounty on his head, dead or alive." They rode off. Adeline sagged against the door, her legs trembling. Kyle emerged from the shadows, his eyes cold with fury. He watched them go. "They will be back," he said. It wasn't a guess. It was a fact. "They did not believe you." He turned and looked at her, his expression softening just a fraction. He handed her a dipper of water. "You were brave." "They're the ones who shot you," she said, her hand shaking. "Yes," he said, his eyes like flint. "And they will not stop until they find me. You are in danger now, Adeline Rosewood, because of me." The air in the cabin crackled. They were no longer a healer and a patient. They were allies, bound together by a ruthless common enemy. The quiet sanctuary of the homestead was gone. Now every gust of wind sounded like horses. Every shadow held a man with a gun. Adeline slept with the Winchester by her side. Kyle, though, seemed to draw strength from the danger. He wasn't just healing anymore. He was preparing. He pushed himself, walking the perimeter, hefting the heavy axe, his face a mask of stone hiding the pain. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky, Adeline was cleaning the rifle on the porch. Kyle sat on the steps, sharpening a small skinning knife he'd had tucked in his moccasin. The scrape of stone on steel was the only sound. "You know how to use that," he said. It wasn't a question. "My husband Thomas taught me," she replied softly. "He said a woman alone out here needed to shoot straighter than she could pray." Kyle grunted. He was a wise man. "He was a good man," she corrected. A silence fell between them, but it was a comfortable one. For a moment, they were just two people, not an Apache and a white woman. "They will come back soon," Kyle said, his voice low. "Perhaps tomorrow. And they will come here." "What will we do?" Adeline asked. He tested the blade with his thumb. "When they come, you will not be here. You will take your mule and ride east at first light. Ride to the town. You will be safe there." Adeline stopped her work. "What are you talking about? This is my home." "It is a wooden box," he countered, his gaze intense. "Your home is your life. I will wait for them. This is my fight. It does not belong to you." A hot flash of anger surprised her. "You think I would run? I lied for you. I tended your wounds. I am as much a part of this as you are now." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw something beyond stoicism in his eyes, respect, and maybe regret. "You have a warrior's heart, Adeline Rosewood. But this is a battle you cannot win." "Then we will lose it together," she said, her chin set. He stared at her for a long time as the light died. Then he put down the knife. "You do not know who you are protecting," he said, his voice suddenly formal. "You have a right to know the name of the man you are willing to die for." He stood up, and he seemed to grow taller, his presence filling the entire porch. "The name I gave you, Kyle, it is a name for the white man's world. It means nothing." He paused, his dark eyes locked on hers. "Among my people, the Chiricahua, I am known as Nantan." The name meant nothing to her. He saw her confusion. "It is not a name," he said, and the words dropped like stones into the quiet evening. "It is a title. It means chief." The world tilted. The rifle in her hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The man she had pulled from the mud was not just some warrior. He was a chief, a leader of the very people her world feared most. The bounty on his head wasn't just for some crime. It was for who he was. The quiet man who had freed a trapped bird was also a man who led his people in a brutal war for survival. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The aura of command he carried even when he was half dead. The strategist's eye. The sheer, indomitable will. "Chief," she whispered. He gave a solemn nod. "My people are searching for me. The men who shot me were not bounty hunters. They were hired to remove me, to break the spirit of my band." Adeline sank onto the porch steps. The danger she was in had just magnified 100 times. This wasn't just sheltering a fugitive. This was harboring an enemy of the state. He was watching her, gauging her reaction. He expected her to run, but the shock was already being replaced by a strange, steely resolve. It didn't change what was right. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Nantan's brow furrowed. "It matters more than anything." "No," she insisted, meeting his gaze. "They are coming to murder a man on my land, and I will not let them." A look of profound surprise crossed the chief's face. He had revealed his greatest secret to drive her away. Instead, it had forged her resolve into steel. He had offered her an escape, and she had chosen to stand with him. In that moment, Adeline Rosewood, the quiet widow, became an ally to the most wanted man in Arizona. But as she looked at him, she saw the amulet at his throat, and under the torn buckskin near his shoulder, she saw something else. A faint, dark mark in his skin, almost perfectly faded, a shape she recognized from her husband's time in the cavalry. It was a brand, the unmistakable brand of the U.S. Army, an Apache chief. With an army brand? The world tilted again. Who was this man, really? He saw where she was looking. The air grew thick with a new, unspoken tension. He had told her one secret, but it was clear he was hiding another, much stranger one. Before she could ask, he turned his head, listening to the night. "They're coming," he said. And this time, he wasn't talking about Kane and Gus. A moment later, a sound reached her. Not hoofbeats. A call. The call of a night bird. But it was too perfect. Too rhythmic. It was a signal. Nantan answered with a low whistle. Out of the shadows, figures began to materialize. Not 2 men. A dozen. Silent warriors on wiry ponies, appearing on the ridgeline like ghosts woven from the dusk itself. They fanned out, forming a protective ring around her homestead. One warrior, older, with gray-streaked hair, rode forward. He dismounted, his eyes fixed on Nantan, 1,000 questions in his gaze. They spoke in the low, guttural tones of Apache. Nantan gestured to the cabin, then to Adeline. The warrior's gaze shifted to her. It was sharp, assessing, and full of suspicion. To him, she was the enemy. Nantan spoke again, his tone firm, pointing to the bandages under his tunic. The warrior's expression slowly changed from suspicion to a grudging understanding. He gave a stiff nod. "This is Dova," Nantan said to her. "My brother's son. He has led the search." The time had come. His people were here. He stood before her on the porch, a chief ready to melt back into the mountains. "You saved my life," he said. "My people are in your debt." "I only did what was right," she whispered. "Few in your world would agree," he said gently. He reached for the beaded amulet at his neck. He untied it and pressed the cool, smooth turquoise into her hand. It was carved in the shape of an eagle. "This was my mother's. It is a symbol of protection. Show it to any Chiricahua, and they will know you are a friend." He closed her fingers around it. "You cannot stay here. Your life in this place is over." "Ita!" Before she could reply, before she could ask about the brand on his shoulder, his nephew Dova spoke again, this time with an urgent, angry tone. He was pointing not at Adeline, but at something Nantan was now holding, something he must have taken from inside his tunic. A book, a small, leather-bound ledger. Dova's words were harsh. He wanted it destroyed. He saw it as white man's poison. Nantan held the book tightly, shaking his head. He looked at Adeline, a new conflict in his eyes. "The brand," he said, finally answering the question she hadn't asked. "I was a scout for the army, one of their best. I learned their ways, their language. I believed a bridge could be built." He looked away, toward the dark mountains. "I was wrong. I was betrayed by my commanding officer, a man named Colonel Blackwood. The story came out in a torrent. Blackwood was corrupt. He was secretly selling army rifles to renegade factions, fueling the very war he was supposed to be fighting, all while buying up the land the government was stealing from displaced tribes. He was playing both sides against the middle, getting rich off the bloodshed." "This ledger," Nantan said, holding up the book, "is his record. Every gun sold, every bribe paid. It is the proof that could stop him, that could end this war. Kane and Gus weren't bounty hunters. They were Blackwood's private army, sent to retrieve the ledger and silence the man who stole it." Now Adeline understood. The stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't just about saving one man. It was about saving thousands. Nantan's nephew Dova didn't see it that way. He saw only betrayal. He saw his chief clinging to a piece of the white man's world that had already cost him dearly. This was the new fight. Not with guns, but with ideas. Dova and half the warriors wanted to ride into the mountains and disappear. to fight their war their own way. Nantan believed the ledger could be a new kind of weapon. He was torn between the ways of his people and the brutal knowledge he'd gained from his enemies. Adeline looked at the chief, at his warriors, at the little cabin that was no longer her home. She had made one choice in a storm, and it had led to this. A crossroads, not just for her, or for Nantan, but for the whole territory. She clutched the turquoise amulet in her hand. Her old life was over, but she was starting to realize that her real life was just beginning. "You can't run," she said, her voice clear and strong in the tense night air. All eyes turned to her. "If you run, he wins. Blackwood wins." Dova snarled something at her in Apache. Nantan held up a hand for silence. "He controls the army," Nantan said. "The law. There is nowhere to take this book where his arm will not reach." "That's not true," Adeline insisted. "The sheriff in Verde Creek, Brody, he's a fair man. He's not army, he's the law." "A small-town sheriff against a U.S. Army colonel?" Nantan scoffed. "He would be crushed." "Maybe," she said, stepping forward. "But you said it yourself. You have to build a bridge. Maybe this is the first stone." A long, heavy silence fell. Nantan looked from his furious nephew to the determined white woman on the porch. He looked at the ledger in his hand. It was a choice between the warrior's path and the scouts, between retreat and a desperate, impossible gamble. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "We ride," he said. "Not to the mountains, to Verde Creek." Dova looked at him with utter betrayal, but he obeyed his chief. They didn't ride as a war party. Nantan chose Dova and 2 other warriors. Adeline packed her father's medical bag, took one last look at the cabin Thomas built, and mounted her mule, Clementine. They rode through the night, a strange and silent little group. A chief, a widow, and 3 warriors, carrying a book that could either save them or get them all killed. They arrived on the outskirts of Verde Creek as the sun was painting the sky a dirty pink. The town was quiet, too quiet. Nantan sent one of his warriors ahead to scout. He came back minutes later, his face grim. "Soldiers," he said, "everywhere." Colonel Blackwood hadn't waited. He'd moved fast. He had ridden into town 2 days earlier, not with a small troop, but with half a regiment. He'd told the town a story about a renegade Apache chief named Nantan who had massacred a peaceful homestead and his white accomplice, a crazed widow named Adeline Rosewood. Sheriff Brody had questioned the story, so Blackwood had him arrested and thrown in his own jail. The town was under martial law. It wasn't a sanctuary, it was a trap. They were trapped. Behind them, Blackwood's trackers would be hunting them. Ahead, a town full of soldiers who wanted them dead. Dova looked at Nantan, his eyes saying, "I told you so." Nantan's face was like granite. He had led them into this. "There is a place," Adeline whispered. "An old mission, south of here. It was abandoned years ago. We can hide there. Think. We just need to think." The old San Ignacio mission was a crumbling adobe ghost. Its bell tower was a hollowed-out tooth against the sky. They took refuge in the dusty, cavernous church, the light slanting through holes in the roof, illuminating dancing motes of dust. For 2 days, they were ghosts, living on what little food they had, while Nantan's warriors slipped in and out like shadows, gathering information. The news was bad. Blackwood had the town locked down tight. He was offering a massive reward for Nantan and Adeline, dead or alive. The townsfolk were scared. They believed Blackwood's story. Adeline felt a wave of despair. She was a murderer in the eyes of her own people. It was Dova who found the crack in Blackwood's armor. While scouting, he'd found the town's doctor, a man named Elias Vance. Vance didn't believe Blackwood. He'd known Sheriff Brody for 20 years. He knew Brody wouldn't just roll over, and he'd treated a few of Blackwood's soldiers for injuries they'd gotten in the line of duty. But their wounds weren't from a fight with Apaches. They were bullet wounds from rifles the army didn't use, civilian rifles, the kind used by men like Jebediah Kane. Adeline's mind started racing. She was a doctor's daughter. She was a nurse. That was a language she could speak. "I need to talk to him," she said. "The doctor." Nantan refused. It was too dangerous. But Adeline was adamant. "You're a chief, and they see you as the enemy," she said. "I'm a woman, a nurse. Maybe they'll listen to me." The plan was insane, but it was the only one they had. That night, Adeline, dressed in a simple dark dress, her hair tucked under a bonnet, slipped into Verde Creek. One of Nantan's warriors guided her through the back alleys, a silent shadow at her side. The town was tense, soldiers on every corner. It felt like walking through a minefield. She found Dr. Vance's small house at the edge of town. She knocked on the door, her heart a frantic drum. An old man with weary, intelligent eyes opened it. "I'm Adeline Rosewood," she whispered, before he could speak, "and everything Colonel Blackwood has told you is a lie." She didn't have much time. She told him everything, about the storm, the wound, the bounty hunters. She told him about the ledger. Vance listened, his face unreadable. When she was done, he was silent for a long time. "The colonel is a powerful man," he said finally. "My word against his is nothing." "But it's not just your word," Adeline said. She pulled something from her pocket. It wasn't the ledger. It was a single, bloody bullet she had dug out of the wall of her cabin after the siege. "This came from the rifle of one of the men who attacked my home. The men Blackwood says you killed. But this isn't an Apache bullet, is it? It's Army issue." A lie, but a plausible one. Vance looked at the bullet. He looked at Adeline's earnest, terrified face, and he made a choice. "Blackwood is meeting with the town council in the morning," he said. "At the saloon. He's trying to convince them to sign over the mineral rights to the land around here for protection. He's using this crisis to rob them blind." A new plan began to form, desperate and wild. It was a plan that relied not on warriors and guns, but on a country doctor and a brave widow. The next morning, the saloon was packed. The town council sat at a table looking nervous. Colonel Blackwood stood at the front of the room, tall and imposing in his decorated uniform. He was talking about the Apache menace, about the need for a firm hand. Just as he was finishing his speech, the doors to the saloon swung open. Adeline walked in. A collective gasp went through the room. Soldiers reached for their guns. "That's the woman!" Blackwood roared. "Arrest her!" But Adeline wasn't alone. Dr. Vance was right behind her, and behind him were a dozen of the town's most respected citizens. "Hold on, Colonel," Vance said, his voice calm but firm. "This woman has a right to speak." Blackwood's face turned purple with rage, but he couldn't just open fire on half the town council. "I am not a murderer," Adeline said, her voice shaking but clear. "I am a nurse. I helped a wounded man. And that man, Chief Nantan, did not attack my home. He defended it. From men hired by Colonel Blackwood." She told her story again, but this time she had an audience. As she spoke, Dr. Vance quietly passed the bullet she'd given him among the council members. They saw the lie. They saw the greed in Blackwood's eyes. Just then, chaos erupted. From the back of the saloon, a single, piercing war cry. Dova and the other two warriors had slipped into town. They created a diversion, firing shots into the air, drawing the soldiers out of the saloon. In the confusion, Nantan himself appeared in the doorway. He wasn't dressed for war. He walked straight up to the stunned colonel, the stolen ledger in his hand. "My fight is with you, Blackwood," Nantan said, his voice ringing with authority. "Not with these people." He threw the ledger down on the table in front of the town council. "Here is your proof." Blackwood, his lies exposed, drew his pistol. But he never got the chance to fire it. A single shot rang out, but it didn't come from Nantan. It came from the doorway of the jailhouse across the street. Sheriff Brody stood there, a smoking rifle in his hand, his jail cell door hanging open. Nantan's warriors hadn't just created a diversion. They'd freed the law. Cornered and exposed, Blackwood made a run for it. But the town had turned on him. The people he had terrorized now stood in his way. He was captured, disarmed, and thrown in the very cell he had put Sheriff Brody in. Justice. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The ledger was sent to a federal marshal, and it brought Blackwood's entire corrupt empire crashing down. A real peace was negotiated with the Chiricahua, with Nantan, now seen as a hero by both sides, leading the way. Adeline could never go back to Willow Creek. Her old life was truly over. But her new one was just beginning. She stayed in Verde Creek, working alongside Dr. Vance, turning his small office into a real clinic. A clinic that treated everyone: settler, prospector, Apache. She had found her bridge. She never saw Nantan again, after he rode back to the mountains to lead his people into a new era of peace. But he did not forget her. On the 1-year anniversary of the storm, she found a single, perfect eagle feather resting on the windowsill of the clinic. A silent message, a promise across 2 worlds that she would never be forgotten. The story of Adeline Rosewood and Chief Nantan proves that history isn't just written by generals and politicians. It's written in the quiet, courageous choices of ordinary people. It's a story about how one act of compassion in the middle of a storm can change the course of everything, blurring the line between enemy and friend, and forging an alliance that saved them all. If their story moved you, please help us share more tales from the forgotten corners of history by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a powerful story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the dramatic, untold stories that truly shaped the American West. Thank you for listening.